Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Bianca Weber-Lewerenz from Germany. Hello.
Hello. And you've written a book about, well, AI is everywhere now. We can't help but hear about it. And it was inevitable to come for construction. So you've written a book about AI, tech, and construction. And so maybe you could explain how the book came about in the first place.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you have me and spreading the word around about innovation and the appreciation of the values in construction industry. Not long time ago, 2022, I finished my book about accents of added value in construction 4.0. And there I put the focus on the ethical observations in dealing with digitization and AI.
And construction is, as we all know, one of the oldest industries in the world. And there have always been things, well, not always, but in the last couple hundred years, there have been building codes, engineering oaths, guilds had certain codes they went by. How does AI complicate that, or what does it add to it?
It's an added value, but we have to consider both pros and cons, like all technical feasibility. As this one increases, and we are talking about BIM, building information modeling, metaverse, artificial intelligence, we are talking about high tech. And it comes with a couple of impacts on both human beings and the society as a whole. So we are talking about data complexity, how that plays into, and all the pressure on the side of environmental emissions, considering that the construction industry has a high responsibility to catch up with the global 40% of CO2 emissions. So there is quite a strong social responsibility and the environmental pressure.
And I would imagine AI, in some ways, used properly, could help with bringing those emissions down and other unsafe conditions or just damaging conditions.
Talking about the sustainability development goals, we are talking more about how we can develop. We are still in the stage of developing certain AI methods and tools and machines in the construction industry. We are thinking more about self-learning construction sites. So, for example, machines communicate to each other and they control each other and control the whole rhythm on a construction site. So that helps a lot to make efficient processes on site and support human work. Also, the fact that artificial intelligence can help to structurize complex data to have decision-making basis. Yeah.
And in your book, you talk about the engineer of tomorrow, in air quotes. Can you tell me what that is and how engineers are going to adapt to this new technology, or will it adapt to them?
Well, like each field of work in construction and also other industries, they are developing according to new technologies and thinking about AI in construction and the whole field of digital methods like BIM and digital twin, talking about smart cities, smart buildings. We have to adjust the curricula. So that means both teaching qualifications have to be adjusted and the contents of what I teach to my students needs to be adjusted as well. So the engineer of tomorrow needs to be able to cope, to work in a very inclusive, diverse environment, working with other disciplines. So it's all going towards cross discipline boundaries and working, for example, with not only with architects, but also with social sciences, with ethicists. So that all plays into my book.
Now, education, like you said, is important, but a lot of construction, at least in North America, it might be different in Europe, is learn on the job, apprenticeships and sort of learning as you go. How does AI tie into that, or is that just people using apps and that becomes the new sort of workflow on the site?
It should be a first step, not working on site and learning by doing only. You need to be prepared for the job, actually. So it starts in the academic training and the apprenticeships for sure. And like me, when I was a mason, that was very new in 1997, that I finished my apprenticeship as a mason, the first in Baden-Württemberg. I was not actually confronted too much with digital methods and AI at that time. But nowadays, new methods flow into the curricula, and also the ethical point gets more and more into that. So the teaching skills and the curricula needs to cope with these new fields that a student, when he graduated, actually is waiting for him. And also the employers are waiting to have these qualified, skilled people in their company.
Now, speaking of that, and speaking of your background as the first female bricklayer in, I apologize, Baden-Württemberg. I'm not going to say it right, but you have a Women in Construction 4.0 as a term in the book, and as somebody who's gone through the industry yourself, and here there's a definite push to get more women and other people who traditionally weren't in the industry
That's right.
But there is definitely some pushback to that too, because construction can be a pretty hidebound industry when all is said and done. So what is Women in Construction 4.0, and how does it address that sort of pushback?
Very good point from you, because diversity, inclusiveness plays into that whole game, considering ethics in AI and construction 4.0. So when I talk about diversity, it's my point is getting engaged and make a call to all the women being proud of what they have, what they can, and what skills they can actually offer to the construction sites. We are talking about a very traditional, conservative, still hesitating towards new changes industry. But talking about the STEMs, talking about what options we have working from home, so all the remote feasibility options, and what kind of backgrounds we have. That is a big potential actually for this traditional industry.
Well, we talked a lot about ethics, but also in the book you talk about the cardinal virtues, and how they apply to construction. So what are those cardinal virtues, and how do they apply to construction?
Virtues are not new. We all have them in us. And like Aristotle said, we have to build on this inner compass that is guiding us through all challenges at work, in life, privacy, in society as a whole. So it's about the values we have to balance, to weight actually the decisions, to think about what makes sense, what to support my human work. It's like a guideline in a compass.
And what kind of ethical conflicts or problems arise in the construction space that AI can address? Because I'm sure there are some that otherwise and also AI is essentially right now it's a big, I'm getting this wrong because I'm not a computer scientist, but a big database that it draws from. So how do you modify that so it addresses the ethical component, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, we are talking very often about gender bias. So first of all, it depends what kind of data is fed into the algorithms.
Right. Yeah.
In construction, we have so much data, and it depends who is feeding this. Is this just with a focus on men? Is it a focus on women? Is it a focus on certain working procedures? So software engineers and experts need to be there, ethicists, to really determine in which direction the whole technological development shall go. But so that's one point, gender bias. We are talking about how we can use these tools to avoid discrimination, how we can use it best to support human work. There are a couple of, it's a big field. Actually, I do not want to run too much into detail.
No, that's okay. I know AI bias is already a problem with facial recognition, where it only recognizes light-skinned people because only light-skinned people worked on it and used that to code it, or chatbots who, you give them 20 questions and all of a sudden they go crazy. So if that sort of technology gets introduced into construction, how do they then sort of, other than just getting rid of it, how do they address that problem? Because at some point this is going to leak into the system before we fix it.
It's a problem in the very beginning, at the early stage, when you determine what this AI shall do. It's the human being who defines the way of decision-making processes. And it's also the human being, if he or she sees it goes in, the algorithm goes into the wrong way, it's the human being to adjust, to improve these systems. We cannot say the AI is controlling us or the AI is giving the direction. It's the human being who sets the system, but also has the responsibility. That's where the ethical responsibility comes into play, to always continuously adjust and improve and control. So there is a lack of transparency very often when we're talking about black holes and cyber attacks, etc. So the whole new framework from the legal side also needs to come into that whole consideration. We need different data security standards. We need, on the construction side, for example, you have so many participants who share and exchange information and communicate this data. So how can we make sure personal rights, the copyrights, how can we make sure all this is communicated safely and data is not lost or going into a wrong direction?
And my final question, well, one of two, is you mentioned smart cities in the book, and in Canada, we had an experience in Toronto where we were going to have a smart city in Toronto, and then it just kind of fizzled out because people were too worried that Google had too much sway over the way it would be done and how much surveillance would happen. So how do you address AI is going to be a component of smart cities, and they're eventually going to happen. So how do you shape AI so that cities and buildings are responsible, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Well, in smart cities, we are talking a large scale. First, let's start with smart buildings. A smart building helps to work over the whole building life cycle, from design, from building, over to dismantling and reusing materials like cradle to cradle, to build this whole processes very efficiently, transparently. And a building is able, with the help of AI, to communicate between all these technical appliances and technical building equipments. So we can also reduce energy consumption. We can reduce the CO2 emissions. We can actually save the data of the people working or living in and see what kind of habits they have and the energy or whatever they need, the technical appliances. Via apps, they can communicate and the building adapts to the habits of the human being. Talking about smart cities, we talk about how these smart buildings can communicate with each other, how the infrastructure, the mobility can communicate with each other. So a lot of routines, processes are facilitated for the human being.
And my final question is, I'm sure anybody listening to this would want to read your book. So how can they get a hold of it? And if it isn't out yet, when can they get a hold of it?
Well, they can check the Springer publisher website or via Amazon, various options.
Okay, great.
And I think it's a very inspiring lecture for all. Not only limited to the people on the construction, but at a larger scale, all these visionaries and people thinking smart, thinking a new way, and always guided by the SDGs.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.